Lions head coach Dan Campbell was in the news this week. And it all stemmed from a decision he made in the game against Green Bay. In that game, Detroit and Green Bay were tied late in the game, 31-31. There was 43 seconds left, and Detroit had the ball at the Green Bay 21, and it was fourth down. They had inches to go, about a yard, maybe some inches. And Dan Campbell made the choice to could either kick a field goal or go for it on first down. Of course, kicking the field goal would put Detroit up, but it would give Green Bay some time, so Detroit would have to kick off, and Green Bay would, say, have 37, 35 seconds to march back down the field. Alternatively, and this is what Dan Campbell chose to do, was to go for the first down. And the idea is if they made the first down, they could then run time off the clock and kick the field goal as time expired, thereby not letting Green Bay have the ball at all. The decision over the past week, I've seen it applauded, I've seen it criticized. Talk about Dan Campbell's big balls. It's just aggressive. He believes in his players. The old live by the sword, die by the sword. Some people called him reckless, a bad coach, all sorts of things. The criticism was the thinking that going on it on the fourth down was reckless. Conventionally, coaches will kick the field goal, putting them up, and then forcing the other team to kind of march down and tie the game or get a touchdown. Some applauded the decision to go for it, and a lot of it had to do with the defense. Some people believed that the defense could not have held the line, and so it was better for Detroit to finish the game on offense. Now, I'm watching the game, and at the time it seemed like the wrong decision, to me anyways. And then over the past week, I've been watching the internet blow up, seeing, again, everyone either praising or criticizing. And so I decided to kind of use an analytic point of view. I'm kind of in math and tech, and so there are some tools in game theory that allow us to analyze decisions, and so I decided to do that. I'm a native Detroiter. I don't live in the state anymore, but I've been following Detroit sports for 50 years. And like many people from the Detroit area, I'm heavily invested in the Lions story this year, especially this year. And I thought that I could mathematically convince myself that Dan Campbell was indeed reckless in that Packer game. And I was a little surprised about what I found out. So here's what I did. In mathematics, there's a tool called expected outcomes. There's a link right here. And it's part of game theory. And in game theory, it helps you determine the best actions when games involve randomness. Board games, rolling dice. You can think of businesses as being somewhat random. And so, needless to say, NFL football is a random event, or has lots of random things going on. So in this theory, one of the things that we'll do is we'll estimate probability. So, for example, we will estimate the probability of, for example, making a 38-yard field goal. And then there are some, and so this is where football knowledge kind of comes into play of how likely something is going to happen. And so I'm going to start with a few examples of simple game theory, and then after we do a couple examples, I'm going to analyze Dan's decision to go forward on fourth down, and then I'll have a spreadsheet that kind of allows us to kind of mess with the probabilities. So here's a fictional game. Let's suppose we have Miami and Dallas. Miami has the ball at the Dallas two-yard line. The game is about to finish, and so Miami has a choice. And by the way, they're down by 2 points. So they could either kick the field goal, and so this is kicking the field goal, or they could go for it on fourth down. This is going to be the last play of the game, and so what did they do? Now, I don't think we need to do any mathematical analysis. It's pretty clear that you got to kick the field goal. But why is that? Okay, and so if we were to kick the field goal, there are two possible outcomes. The kick can be made or it can be missed. Now, the probability of a kicker making a kick of of that range is ballpark 97%. Of missing is just 3%. Now, the numbers that are above these are what are referred to as outcomes or values. So in this case, if Miami made the field goal, they will win the game. And typically in game theory, you will assign the score of +1 to win. And if they miss, we will assign a score of -1 to indicate losing the game. And so what you do is you multiply those two numbers, and then you add them all up, and then this is what you get. And so this number here is what's referred to as an expected outcome. So kicking the field goal is, on average, going to result in a score of, not a football score, but a utility of 0.9, which 0.9 is pretty close to 1. And so Miami is in pretty good shape here. Now, if they go for it, there are two possible outcomes. They could actually score the touchdown. And in this case, I'm just going to put a score of 0.5 there. And that's the probability of getting a touchdown. And being stopped at the goal line, let's just call it 50% of the time, and they're going to lose the game. Now, again, you multiply those two numbers, you add them up, and you get a 0. Now, in these cases, what you do is you take your two alternatives and you pick the bigger number. And so in this case, the choice is made, you kick the field goal. Now let's change the situation up again, except now let's say that Miami is more at midfield. Let's suppose they're at Dallas 46-yard line. Again, 2 seconds to go, so it's again the last play of the game. So in this case, kicking a 63-yard field goal is no longer a sure shot. I'm just going to put in 10% of making it. 90% of the time that kick will be missed. If I multiply those numbers and add it up, I get this. Notice it's negative. And so Miami is, in this scenario, most likely going to lose. Now, the alternative is for Miami to do a Hail Mary. Now, here's where things get a little more complicated in that the Hail Mary could result in a touchdown. And I'm going to say that is going to happen 5% of the time. Seems a little high, but that's the number I'm using here. It's also possible that pass interference would be called, and it's also possible that the ball just falls harmlessly to the ground. Now, if they get a touchdown, that's a win. If it's an incomplete pass, it's a loss. On the other hand, if we have pass interference, the play continues. There will be two possible outcomes. Now, at that point, it's likely that Miami will either kick a field goal. They will most definitely kick a field goal. And again, I'm going to use 97% likely and 3% miss. And if they make it after the pass interference call, it's a win. If it's missed, they're lost. And what we have at all these junctures are two numbers. We have an outcome and a probability. And what we do is we multiply them all up, we add them together, and we get a number. And so this is the expected outcome. You will notice that this number it still doesn't look good for Miami. That negative says that they are likely to lose. But this number is better than that number, and so they will obviously throw a Hail Mary. So we're going to use that technique in the Green Bay-Detroit situation. And here's a summary. Again, it's what I said earlier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze. First, I'm going to analyze what happens if they try to kick the field goal and if they go with it for first down. So this is for kicking the field goal. Now, if they kick the field goal, I'm going to use 97% as the probability of making it. From there is still time left on the clock. So Green Bay will receive the kickoff. Let's suppose that we assume that it's going to go in the end zone and they'll take possession at the 30-yard line. Now, from the 30-yard line, with no timeouts and 38 seconds or so to go, I'm going to just, for the sake of arguments, put 5% of the time Green Bay will score a touchdown in that situation. 50% of the time, they will march down and get a field goal. Again, that might be a little high. And then 45% of the time, they will just kind of fizzle out. Okay. Again, what I do is I take those two numbers, those numbers, and I will multiply them. On the other side, it is possible that Detroit, Jake Bates, could have missed the field goal. It's a small probability, but it's possible. And so then from that position, at that point, Green Bay takes over at, I think, the 21-yard line, their own 21. And again, they could march down the field, get a touchdown, they could get a field goal, or they could just stall. Okay. Again, those are all pairs of numbers. I multiply them together. And this positive, because it's a positive number, it indicates that Detroit's in pretty good position if they kick the field goal to win the game. So let's hold on to that number. Now let's suppose they go for it on fourth down. Now there's two things that could happen. They could make it, and I'm going to assign the probability 6.65. 65% of the time they were going to make it. After I made these slides, I kind of think that the probability is actually a little higher, in that if you put Detroit's line, the offense on the field for 100 plays in that exact situation, I kind of think that they would probably be successful in making the first down, 80% of the time? In any event, I'm using 0.65, and I'm going to give 35% of the time that Green Bay is going to stop them. If they make the field goal, if they make the first down, they then run out the clock, and then they will try a field goal. And of course, it's not a given, but 97% of the time, Jake Bates is going to make that. 3% of the time, he's going to miss it. And at this point, I'm going to assign a score of 0. And this is what I'm going to assign for going to overtime. Now, I'm simply going to say that overtime is a score of 0, in that it's not a Detroit win, it's not a Green Bay win. I'm just going to say it's a score of 0 because that's a whole new quarter that needs to be played. Alternatively, over here, they could have been stopped on fourth down. Now, if Detroit is stopped on fourth down, it's not like they lose. Green Bay has to go and still do something. And so, again, from their own 21, they could have marched down and got a touchdown. I'm going to say that's 5% of the time. They could have marched and got a field goal. That's probably more likely. Or the drive just stalls. Okay. Again, what you have is you have a bunch of pairs of numbers. You multiply them, and you will notice that this number is actually larger than that number. So going forward on fourth down, according to these probabilities, it made sense. It's a larger payoff to do that. So going forward did maximize the expected outcome. One thing that's not shown there, however, is something called standard deviation. And standard deviation is a way to say how consistent an outcome is. For example, if when investing money, people say, well, if you invest in the stock market long term, that's going to give you the best return. However, there's you expect more fluctuations as you're going along. And so that standard deviation measures the fluctuation. And so going for it, so this is going for the first, and then this is kicking the field goal. And you can see that the smaller number is actually more favorable in this situation. And so that's part of the Gamblin Dan, perhaps, in that you're less assured of getting that. Now I've created a spreadsheet. I'm going to show you that spreadsheet in a minute. It makes use of some probabilities. This is probably the most important one. It's the probability that Detroit makes a first down when going for it. Again, it was like fourth and half a yard or fourth and a yard, and I'm going to use 0.65. Now, the higher that is, the more likely Detroit is going to get a first down, and you should go for it. On the other hand, if Detroit, if the front line is hurt or banged up and you don't have a lot of confidence, then you're better off kicking. Okay. The probability of making a 30 to 40-yard field goal is that. I'm not going to mess with that much. There's also the probability that Green Bay takes over the ball at their own 21-yard line and drives and gets a touchdown or gets a field goal. And I'm going to use 5% and 45%, and the 50% is the timeout. And then this represents the probability if they receive the kickoff and start from their own 30. One thing is, for example, maybe Dan Campbell has some idea about the overtime. Maybe he thinks that the teams are evenly matched and going to overtime is like starting a new game. On the other hand, it's possible that he views that overtime they are at a disadvantage. Maybe something happened in the game. Maybe he thinks that there's a slight advantage to Green Bay at that point. I'm going to use 0, but that could also be changed. And it turns out that when I show you this spreadsheet, I'm going to be adjusting these probabilities, and the decision to go for it actually is supported under a wide range of probability values. Here's the spreadsheet. Over here I have the different probabilities. Here's the probability that Detroit converts on the 4th down, and I have that currently set at 65%, 97% likely to make a field goal. And then I have these groups of 3. And this is the probability that Green Bay can drive from their own 21-yard line and result in a touchdown. The next one is field goal, and then the other one is just time expires. And you'll notice that all of those add up to 1. These probabilities correspond to Green Bay receiving a kickoff, getting a touchback, and starting at their 30-yard line. This one represents the kind of the value of going to overtime. And so in theory, one might say that it doesn't matter. Detroit and Green Bay are both equally likely to win going to overtime. So here I have, in the purple section, I have the decision to kick. And again, there's 2 outcomes. The kick is good, no good. And then from there, we have Green Bay's outcomes. And if you remember, I had 2 values that I were multiplying, and those are these 2 values here in this spreadsheet. This one in bold is the kind of ultimate expected value to be returned on kicking a field goal. The yellow section, same thing, and this number is, you'll notice again, it's the same number as before, it's larger than that, and this is the expected outcome having gone for it. And what I do is I check and pick the larger of the 2. If this is larger, we go for it. If this is, we will kick. And so let's just kind of mess with some of these probabilities. So let's suppose that that Detroit's offensive line was not likely to get enough push to convert the first down. So let's suppose that it's actually 40%. If that were the case, then the decision to kick would be the proper decision to make. On the other hand, if let's suppose it's 80%, which probably doesn't seem out of line in my thinking, in that if you ran that exact same scenario 100 times, my guess is that the line and the running backs would get a first down, say 80% of the time. And you can see that obviously the higher that is, the more it makes sense to go for it. Let me put it back at 65%. Oh, and also, one other thing. Over here I compute standard deviations. In general, for decision making, you want lower numbers. And as this number gets larger, as the probability of getting a first down improves, you'll see that the standard deviation starts to get really small. And so not only do you have high expected outcome, you're doing it with less risk. Let me put that back at 0.65. So here, this would be somebody's assessment of what it means to go to overtime. If the 2 teams are evenly matched, maybe it's like a coin flip in overtime. On the other hand, maybe you think that you have a good chance of winning in overtime, and so you don't fear it as much. And so, for example, if you felt that going to overtime favored the Lions, then maybe you kick it. All of a sudden, the decision becomes to kick the ball because you don't fear overtime as much. On the other hand, if you did not like or felt very strongly that Green Bay had an advantage going to overtime, then you can update. That's how it would be reflected.